Hello, and welcome to It Doesn't Have to Be Boring, Small Tweaks to Increase Engagement with Your Foundational Literacy Curriculum. My name is Kristine Paulson. I am an instructional coach in a suburb of Chicago called Skokie, Illinois. I'm also a mom to 3 kiddos. I have a 4th grader, a 2nd grader, and a kindergartner. And this photograph of the mulleted child in the corduroy jumper is me when I was in kindergarten in the early 90s, also at Middleton Elementary School. Over the last 3 years, I've had the great pleasure of working in the place where I learned to read and grew up. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the skills that I began to learn when I was a kindergartner, foundational literacy. And when I was a kindergartner in the 90s, I distinctly remember learning 1 letter a week. When my youngest brother Tom was born at the end of March, we were on Y week, so we were learning all about yaks. Things have changed a little bit in foundational literacy instruction since the 1990s, but some of the research base is the same. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some of that science of reading research base, but how to make that instruction not boring. So here's our plan for today. Our target is to explore different pathways to increase learner engagement so we can apply them to our foundational literacy instruction. The way that this is going to roll is we'll start with a little bit of time building some background knowledge together on the science of reading, as well as the sciences of motivation and engagement. After a little bit of background knowledge, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at application, exploring one principle in the Universal Design for Learning framework, which is engagement, and applying some tweaks to published curriculum materials that both maintain the integrity of the programs that some of us have to teach, as well as increasing engagement and student motivation. And then finally, I'll offer a reflection question where I'm hoping that you'll be able to jot down a thing or two that you could try tomorrow in your classroom spaces. So if we can leave today with the following, we'll be in good shape. An understanding of how motivation and engagement impact learning, and at least one try tomorrow idea that you can take to your own space to share with your learners or teachers that you support. All right, let's dig in. So these 3 graphics come from the science of reading research. And in general, if you're teaching a curriculum resource that claims to be based on the science of reading, 1 or all 3 of these things are referenced. In 1986, so before my corduroy jumper picture when I was in kindergarten, Goff and Tunmer came out with the simple view of reading, and very basically says that if you take decoding skills, so reading the words on the page, and language comprehension, the ability to understand spoken language, you will get reading comprehension. About a decade and a half later, the National Reading Panel came out with their landmark report, and in it, they named 5 different pillars of reading: phonemic awareness and phonics, which feel like they fit into that decoding category, fluency, vocabulary and comprehension, which feel more like that language comprehension category. And they said these are the 5 things that need to be in place for reading to occur. About the same time, Scarborough came out with this visual representation of reading that feels very similar to the simple view of reading and the 5 pillars of reading from the National Reading Panel report. It takes this strand of language comprehension, which they break down into background knowledge and vocabulary and language structures, and this strand of word recognition, so phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition. And this thinker hypothesized that when language comprehension becomes more strategic and when word recognition becomes more automatic, those 2 strands weave together into skilled reading. These 3 models form the basis for what we talk about as the science of reading. If these things are in place, learners should be able to read. And something that feels missing from these 3 models is the human learner's experience. So take the cognitive process as one piece of the puzzle, and then let's talk about adding some other things. Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright came out with this active view of reading model more recently. And something that I think is super, super powerful and important about this model is while it takes and recognizes these same pieces that the science of reading models take into account, word recognition, language comprehension, including background knowledge and vocabulary and things like that. What Duke and Cartwright add is this idea of active self-regulation. They call their model a reader model as opposed to simply a model of reading. And they talk about how the human person and what they bring into the reading experience is a really important part of reading. And so something that we'll focus on a little bit in this session together today is this very first piece from the active self-regulation kind of bubble of motivation and engagement. So there is a science of lots of different things, and there is a lot of science around motivation and engagement and how it impacts learning. So we'll just take a couple of nuggets out of some science of learning around motivation and engagement, and then we're going to go jump into application of those things into curriculum. So the first nugget is just a definition for what motivation is. It comes out of psychology, and Linenbrick, Garcia, and Patel say that motivation is a person's capacity to start and then sustain doing something. So yes, I'm going to do that thing and I can keep doing it. It's kind of motivation in a nutshell. Parsons and Erickson wrote a piece for Kaplan recently where they talk about how motivation in learning is associated with persistence, with success, and with well-being. And persistence, success, and well-being are three really important things that we want our learners to have when they are approaching learning to read. And finally, this last quote comes from CAST, the organization that puts out the Universal Design for Learning framework. And they talk about how individuals differ so much in background knowledge and culture and preferences that there's no one way to engage all learners. And so since there isn't one best way to engage every single kind of learner, offering multiple options for engagement is super important. So that brings me to one of the reasons this topic is so interesting to me. My youngest daughter, Allie. This is Allie recently. She is in kindergarten. She's an old kindergartner. She turned 6 in September. And one of the pieces of homework that she has to do every night is to read something from her red bag. And that is her baggie of books from guided reading that comes home from school. We have a log that we need to write one of the titles on. And something that I so appreciate about her teacher is that she encourages families to read from the red bag or from something else if it's more interesting to the child. Well, Allie is that child where everything in her red bag is boring. I read that already. We did that in school. So one night I asked her, what would you like to read? And this is what she picked. She picked a paper book that her teacher had stapled about space. Allie is very, very, very into space right now. We've read a lot of books, nonfiction books from the library. She's watched some videos. They're studying it in school, so they've drawn models. And she pulled this book out and she started to read it herself. There is some language in there that I would not expect a kindergartner to decode immediately, but Allie has background knowledge on this topic, so she could read words like distance and solar system. This book is definitely a personal preference of hers. And so when she did come to some words she didn't know, she had a lot of persistence in solving some of those words. This is a super high interest text for her. And it was a really authentic piece of reading for her because it was something she got to do the illustrations on herself. And so taken all together, this reading experience was highly, highly motivating for Allie. There was some challenging vocabulary in it, to be sure. There was also a lot of decodable words and a lot of sight words and pattern words that she was able to read with a lot of success herself. In that Kaplan article, Parsons and Erickson say, it is possible to embed principles of motivation in instruction built on the science of reading. So specifically, reading and writing instruction that is authentic, collaborative, organized around high interest text, and appropriately challenging have a clear basis in the scientific literature on supporting reading motivation. And so these are some of the nuggets that we're going to take into application when we think about some ways that we can tweak curriculum materials that have been handed to us, that have been published in a book for anybody across the country to teach as if all children are the same, when we know that they are not. I'm hoping that some of that background research on the science of reading was supportive of just solidifying our understanding of what exactly it is our curriculum says it's based off of, and also that some of these nuggets from the science of motivation and engagement can offer some ways to pry open space in your curriculum if you are being asked to teach from a script and you know that your kids need something that looks a teensy bit different. So at the end of this presentation, I'll just pause on a reference page if you'd like to pause the slide, and you can pull any of those resources if they might be helpful to you. Okay, that's the background. So let's apply. So let's explore one principle from that Universal Design for Learning framework, and we'll look at some things that are very likely in your published curriculum materials for foundational literacy that we can tweak. All right. So remember this last quote from the organization CAST. So CAST is, I wrote it down, the Center for Applied Special Technology was the original name. And this organization puts out a framework called the Universal Design for Learning. And this framework takes 3 principles of ways that we can kind of modify or tweak our curriculum to make it universally accessible to all learners. And this green column, this very first one, talks about offering multiple means of engagement for learners so that all students can access learning, all students can build their knowledge and skills, and all students can internalize what they have learned. This QR code will take you to this website, or you can put in your browser udlguidelines.cast.org. If you're the kind of learner who likes to have a model like this up simultaneously with this presentation, feel free to open it on your phone or in another tab. But I'll also kind of be toggling back and forth between this presentation and this page. 3 more seconds to get it up. Okay. So what we're going to do for the remainder of our time together is take a look at some kind of examples of things that are very likely in your foundational literacy curriculum in some form or fashion. I didn't take any screenshots of anything for copyright, but I just recreated what these worksheets probably look like, and then we'll talk about ways we can tweak them. So this first worksheet is an example of what is very likely in a workbook for students to practice high frequency words. There's very likely a routine to read the word, spell the word, and then students are asked to write the word in a space that looks like this. Maybe they write it more than once. And then usually there's some sort of using it in a sentence, either a closed sentence like this, where there's parts of it written and you have to fill in the correct word, or perhaps students are generating sentences themselves. When students look at a workbook page like this, for me as a teacher, I'm often wondering who's bored. For whom is this process or this practice becoming monotonous and rote, or is it just not engaging to have to fill in a worksheet? So that is one place I would go. Oh, my face disappeared. Hopefully it comes back. That is one place that I would go to the Universal Design for Learning framework. And I would take a look at this idea of recruiting interest. So on the page, I can actually click recruiting interest to give me some ideas for how I might tweak this. So there's a little paragraph that gives you some narrative information about how learners can have their interest engaged or recruited. It talks a little bit about how every learner differs significantly in what keeps their attention, and also how the same learner will differ over time. So it's really important to have alternative ways to recruit interest. Then if you scroll down, there are 3 checkpoints for recruiting interest. One is to optimize choice. One is to optimize relevance or authenticity, and then minimizing threats and distractions. And so when I, as a teacher, am thinking about worksheet high frequency words, I still want students to practice writing these words. So maybe if I gave them some choice, that would be an easy way to increase engagement. Let's see what some options could be. When you click on that one checkpoint, there will be another narrative paragraph that gives you more information. And then there's always a bulleted list of things that you could try. So I've found that skimming this bulleted list will generate some ideas for me that I can then turn around and implement. So right away for me, when I'm thinking about trying to increase choice and autonomy with something like a worksheet, these two jump out. This idea of using tools for information gathering, using the context or the content of the assessment is tweaked a little bit. So a couple of things that I thought of that I could try include, there I'm back, different materials for students to write with or to write on. So instead of the workbook page, some students might be more motivated by writing on a whiteboard. This would be a lovely thing for students who like to erase and correct their letter formation or find it less threatening to have the ability to do that more easily than pencil. Perhaps making note cards or in like flashcards on color could be really fun. So having some different colored note cards might be engaging for some students. I love Mr. Sketch or any others like smelly markers. Just a different tool that students don't usually use could be motivating or interesting. And then these little scratch off cards where you use like a tool that scratches and then you see the rainbow colors underneath can also be super motivating for practicing high frequency words. At the end of the day, if what I'm getting kids to do is to practice saying, spelling, forming letters, the worksheet doesn't matter. Any tool that's engaging to kids, yay rah. Here's another thing that is very likely in your foundational literacy curriculum, decodable texts. This particular book, Sam Sat, is not a real book, but it is a representation of lots of real decodable books that if you teach in kindergarten or first grade in particular, you have seen Sam sat on a mat. Sam can nap. What can Sam do, right? Like these simple rote, sometimes a little bit boring and not super engaging decodable texts. And I understand the science of reading behind having a text for students to read that is controlled, that allows them to practice the phonics skills that they've learned so far. Some decodable books are better than others. It's likely if you are teaching a classroom full of 20 plus students that for some students, SamSat is not going to be a very engaging or motivating learning opportunity for those students. So when it comes to decodable texts, there were two different things that I was thinking about as ways to tweak the curriculum that we are given. And one of them is to help students sustain effort and to persist when decodable texts feel challenging or difficult. And so for that, we go back to the UDL framework, and I'm scrolling down to this building engagement, providing opportunities for sustaining effort and persistence. We can take a look at the narrative paragraph again. There are lots of learning skills and strategies that require sustained attention and effort. Decodable text might be one of those things for some students. When students are motivated, they can regulate their attention, they can sustain their concentration. When students are not motivated, that can become really tricky. And so what are some ways that we can tweak the learning experiences that our curriculum is suggesting we offer students to increase their persistence and give every student an opportunity to succeed with a task like this? You can scroll down for those checkpoints for effort and persistence. There are 4 checkpoints to take a look at. And when I'm thinking about students who can use some support in order to tackle challenge, fostering collaboration and community is the first thing that jumps out at me. So I'm going to click on that. Same thing, there's a little bit of a narrative paragraph that gives a little bit of context. And then there's that bulleted list of things you can try. This first one, create cooperative learning groups with clear goals, roles, and responsibilities. Immediately, I think of partner reading. Partner reading is a practice that's been in primary classrooms for such a long time, and it's a lovely thing to bring into decodable text reading. So even if our decodables don't suggest that they're read with a partner, it's an easy tweak to make to a curriculum material we already have. I've seen lots of teachers do lovely things like partner reading charts or checklists, depending on different cooperative learning programs that you're familiar with. It's called different things. But one way that this could go is to have two students sitting together next to each other with the book in the middle. A partner A might be the reader, where partner B is the listener and the coach. And partner B is paying attention to the text. Maybe they're thinking about fluency, maybe they're thinking about decoding, and they have some tools at their disposal to coach their partner if their partner gets stuck or needs a tip. These can be things you already have in your classroom, vowel charts that come with your curriculum, sight word lists, or flashcards, any word solving charts if you've taught students any strategies for like take the ending off or try a different vowel part or look for syllables, whatever the thing is. Those charts can be available to partner B as tools to help them coach partner A. And then after students have read the book, a lot of times with decodable text in published curriculum, there's an opportunity for students to either answer text-dependent questions or respond to a text-dependent prompt in writing and or drawing. And so that can be supported, again, particularly if that's challenging, that can be supported by a partnership through some oral practice first. So if partner A did the reading, then maybe partner A asks some questions of partner B, like, who were the characters, or why did a certain character do a certain thing? And partner B could be the person answering the questions, going back into the book to finding solutions or answers. Students can practice orally answering those questions that either they've generated or that your curriculum gave them out loud. And that oral rehearsal can really help prep students to do some writing in response to reading, either answering multiple choice questions or writing in response to a prompt of some kind. So partnership reading, working in collaboration, is one way to support effort and persistence if the task feels hard for students. Another way that partner reading might be supported is if the text itself is boring. It can be tricky to motivate a student to read a book like Sam Sat if the student doesn't particularly care for cats or just in general is kind of over it for the day or in general. So I'm going back to that recruiting interest idea again that we talked about with the high frequency word worksheet. What if the task is just not interesting to students? What can we do? Back to the UDL page, thinking about this recruiting interest idea again. When we thought about high frequency words, we thought about ways of optimizing choice. This time I'm asking a student to read something that they don't really seem to care about. How can I optimize relevance or value or authenticity in this task? So I'm going to click on that and skim and see what I can find. There's a narrative paragraph again. Is the task meaningful to the student? Is there anything equivalent to their real life that can be applied in the situation? I'm looking at the bulleted list now. Can I vary the activity or source of information so it's more personalized or culturally relevant and responsive, age and ability appropriate? Okay, so I have a decodable text that is not socially relevant, culturally relevant, interesting, appropriate. So what could I do about that? What could I do with the text? Here are two things that I've been thinking about. One is don't use it. Sam Sat is probably a book that has 5 or 6 pages with a bunch of short A words in it. I could probably write a decodable book using the phonics pattern on a way higher interest topic myself. Roblox games, Pokemon, a movie that came out recently, Taylor Swift. Like, pick a topic that kids actually care about. And as an adult, I could, not for every decodable book, but once in a while, if Sam Sat is really a big struggle, I could write a decodable book pretty quickly, print some pictures, let kids illustrate it themselves. Here we go. Even better is if I can take my small group instruction with that Sam Sat book, and instead of Sam Sat, we write our own decodable text. So now I'm giving kids an opportunity to practice using some of those phonics patterns in writing. They can draw or we can print pictures. And now I have a decodable book that they have authored that they're going to care even more about because the topic is interesting and because they wrote it. And if you can give them an audience for reading that book, like, you're golden. A younger grade level, an older grade level, a sibling, a partner, whomever. So here's a Pokemon example. Pikachu can get a snack. Can and snack are short A words. Snorlax, Pokemon and short A, look at that, is napping. You can even get some more interesting word endings in there if that's something within the scope of what kids can do. So a different way to think about decodables is to not use the book necessarily itself. Once in a while, write one as a teacher, or give your students an opportunity to write some as well. All right. We're coming to the last couple of examples. This one is for any of those like word study, morphology kinds of lessons that start to show up in K1 and 2 when you're adding endings to things. This is an example of one pretty easy way that this can look, and it doesn't feel very authentic and it doesn't feel very connected to real reading or writing. Here's a word, write the ending that I've already told you is the thing, and then put the word together. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong or bad with this, but oftentimes it's disconnected from actual text. A lot of times it's not a huge or robust part of the curriculum, and so it kind of feels like a one-off. So what are some things that we can do with this? We can go back into the UDL framework, and we can think about ways to sustain effort or persistence by varying the demands or the resources that we're giving students. One way that that can go is, instead of filling in the worksheet, we can ask students on a page of their notebook to collect words with that part. So now we're asking them to think about that ing ending, and we're asking as they read to notice that ing ending and then to transfer it, write it down. So they're thinking about it, they're reading it, maybe they've said it, now they're writing it. And now we can start to gather some interesting words, and we can start to notice how endings work maybe. Like if I'm collecting S, nights and dogs and bodies, those are all like plurals of things. What is jumps? Is it 5 jumps? Or is it like he jumps? So now the ending S is working in different ways. This can be an entry into more interesting and robust conversations about morphology with young learners. I'm going to go back for a second. Something else that we can think about when it comes to some of these morphology worksheets or things like this is we can give students an opportunity to self-reflect. And this goes for phonics patterns too. Really anything that students are doing in foundational literacy that they sometimes do isolated out of context, if we give students a chance to reflect on their own work in context, that can help with transfer. So one way that that could go is to give students something like this editing checklist, where maybe I, as the teacher, have filled in 1 or 2 things, and then a bunch of the lines are blank. And so if I'm a thinker who is noticing ED is an ending that I need to be putting on words instead of T, like hopped isn't a T, it's an ED ending. And needed isn't ID, it's actually that same ED ending. I can set a goal for myself in this box to say, use ED for past tense. And then in my own writing, I can be checking, did I spell ED with those 2 letters, or did I spell T or ID? And I can make some revisions or some edits. So like a personalized checklist is another way that students can take something that tends to be isolated and make it more meaningful and relevant by helping students self-reflect and apply their learning. Okay, last but not least, one of my very favorite things in the world is feedback. In the Universal Design for Learning framework, increasing mastery-oriented feedback is one way to sustain effort and to build persistence. And so just like in our reading workshop time and our writing workshop time, even during these whole group opportunities where all students are writing their high frequency words on whatever they're writing them on, I can use it as an opportunity to do some like micro conferencing. I can skim and scan around the room. I can offer a couple of compliments. Your H is nice and tall. Good for you. You remembered the silent E on have. I can give a quick tip or a demonstration like, don't forget, English words don't end in V. How does have end and give end? I can also make some little suggestions like, amazing, you wrote all those words. Can you try adding an ending to them and see how that changes the spelling? And I'm off. It's 2 seconds, a little like nudge, and then kids have a little bit of differentiation. So increasing mastery-oriented feedback is something that's in the UDL framework for increasing student engagement. And it's also just a practice that we know is really powerful in reading and writing instruction in general. All right. So we spent a little time building some background knowledge, in particular on motivation and engagement in learning, in addition to the science of reading. We looked at a couple of examples of ways we can go between the work that students are being asked to do that might not be the right fit for them, and that green UDL framework column that can just spark some ideas for us, like, oh yeah, partner reading with decodables, of course. Oh, I could just rewrite that book. Oh, they could write on something, not a worksheet. Just spark some ideas for increasing engagement from that UDL website. And so now we're in this last piece where I'm hoping that some of these opportunities for increasing engagement for learners that came from the UDL framework might spark something that you could try in your space with your own students, or that you could offer up to teachers that you support. So this is the last reflection question I'll leave you with. What feels like a powerful, easy to try tweak that you could make or suggest that would matter to you and meet a need you've observed in your students? Maybe it's with recruiting their interest, sustaining effort when things feel hard, or increasing challenge. Maybe it's with self-regulation, self-reflection, feedback and assessment. Awkward pause. Good think, good chat. I'm going to leave us with this quote from Tim Rosinski, who wrote recently that a great challenge for teachers of reading is to find ways to make this science of reading, we know it matters, come to life in artful, authentic, engaging, and effective ways. And I'm really hoping that even though we have some published curriculum materials that give us a lot of the what, that we as teacher practitioners will be able to lean on some of this science of motivation and some frameworks around what we know motivates learners, all learners, to have options to learn, to bring some of that curriculum more to life for our students. And last but not least, the 5-year-old in corduroy with the mullet in me says, thank you very much for taking such wonderful, loving care of our primary students. They deserve you. Here are those, oh, my face is in the way, so weird. Here are those resources that I referenced across this presentation, so you could pause and mute my voice for a moment. If any of these are things that you would want to be able to look up, perhaps to take back to stakeholders in your districts who might need a little bit more push to understand why we as teachers need to have a little bit of flexibility in our curriculum to support engagement and motivation across all of the learners that we serve. Thank you so much.